Hey, detoxers. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the intersection of so called artificial intelligence and war with Chris Hables Gray, author of a new book, AI Sacred Violence and War, The Case of Gaza. Chris, welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Oh, thank you. I've seen some of your podcasts. They're great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on here, and it was a pleasure to get to read AI Sacred Violence and War. And I imagine a lot of people out there have this question as they hear that title. Uh, Tell us, where do you find this intersection of war and artificial intelligence?
Well, I did my PhD at UCSC in History of Consciousness, 1985 to 1991, and it turned into this book, Postmodern War. What I looked at was how computers were being used by the US military as metaphors and as actual weapons or force multipliers. So since then, I've studied how high technology has been utilized by the militaries of the world. And we've seen in the horrible situation in Gaza, there's been a step up in this utilization. Never before have we seen so much so-called AI and other high technology, high digital technology utilized in combat operations as Israel is doing now. So because of the tragedy in Gaza and because of my background in this area, even having been a lecturer in Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces Staff and Command College, where my book Postmodern War was required reading for a decade. No longer, because in that book I argue that such high technology doesn't win wars. And that's what I also argue in this latest book, and point out that Israel may be killing a lot of people, mainly innocent people, but in no way does that mean they're going to win the war. And in fact, they're losing the war horribly in the long term. For Israel's long-term health and or survival, this has been a disaster. And it continues as Israel doubles down on the genocidal policy and then that is now starving millions of people to death, which I have to admit, I'm deeply shocked by how little the world has reacted, although the EU, especially led by Spain and some other countries, is really starting to do something about this.
Okay, well, talk to me a little bit about that, because one of the things I found interesting about your book is you mention in there, you talk about your identity, and there's been, I want to call it a debate, but I think unfortunately we haven't had a debate about it. But there's been this kind of background conversation in the United States since October 7th that criticizing Israel in any way is commensurate with anti-Semitism, and I wonder, you kind of, I think, you talk about that in the book. Can you talk a little bit though about where you stand on that issue about whether or not critiquing Israel is a form of anti-Semitism?
Well, it's laughably not true. I mean, to equate Israel with Judaism is in fact incredibly anti-Semitic. Many Jews do not support Israel. Many more Jews do not support what Israel's doing now. Majority of American Jews have been polled and have stood up. Thousands have been arrested. Hundreds of rabbis in the Congress um, saying this is wrong. This is bad for Judaism. If you read uh, the the Torah, the Talmud, the old what people some people call the Jewish Bible, you will see that God, in their own telling of their story, often feels the Jews have gone too far in their nationalism, and they are horribly punished for it. Everything that happened to the Jews, according to those who are strict believers in these sacred texts, God did to them, and he did horrible things, and usually it was because they of their hubris and their nationalism and so on, and the crimes they committed, sometimes at the behest of the same God. So this is just a nonsensical argument, and the fact that it's being put forward by documented anti-Semites in the Trump administration and in the far right in America and in the UK and in Germany is laughable. If it wasn't implicated in genocide, it's just not true. Um, it's just not true at all. And that many of the best critics, the most well-informed critics of this current wave of genocide are Jewish, makes this point even stronger. And in fact, hundreds, if not thousands now, of Jewish academics, for example, have signed petitions denouncing this fake anti-Semitist argument that's being made by the far right. I think a real interesting thing is how it works out in Germany. In Germany, if you say out loud on the street from the river to the sea, which means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. This is considered a Palestine national slogan, and you can be arrested and deported. An Irishman was just deported for Germany for just saying that. Of course, it's also a slogan of the far right in Israel. The revisionist Zionists were behind this violence. So I don't know. They don't get in trouble for that. But actually, what you see in Germany is Germany can be both anti-Semitic and claim to be fighting anti-Semitism with this myth that to criticize Israel is somehow anti-Semitic. Israel is not representative of Judaism. It's not the placeholder for Judaism. And perhaps at one time, I believe this, I might have been wrong, there was a progressive liberatory element to the establishment of the state of Israel with progressive Zionists and so on. This is not true anymore. When I was there, first for a conference, actually the best conference I've ever been to as an academic,
Hmm.
put on by Shimon Nava, the general in charge of the Staff Command College, whose wife taught feminism at Tel Aviv University. And later I went back to lecture at the Staff Command College. General Shimon Nava pointed out to me that they were losing the battle of against hate, Jewish hate for the Arab people, for the Palestinian people. He introduced me to the first Orthodox general in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and said soon they will run this. And there's many different types of Orthodox. Many people don't know that whole strands, like the Lubavitchers of Orthodoxy, Jewish Orthodoxy, are against the state of Israel. For in fact, those reasons I cited that are in their own sacred text. But many Orthodox do support the current expansionist state of Israel. And in fact, some of the people in the cabinet have called for Israel to expand beyond the Jordan River, deep into Jordan, and make a Eretz Israel, greater Israel state. Southern Lebanon, Gaza, of course, the Sinai, deep in the Jordan, a huge hunk of Syria. This is their dream, to make an Israeli kingdom greater than King David or Solomon ever ruled over. And it's madness, of course. It's just pure madness. But much of contemporary politics are pure madness. So that doesn't mean it's not real.
And let me ask you one other question before we return to the book, then, because you've used this word quite a few times in the interview thus far. You've used the word genocide, and a lot is media narratives. And I've been sort of kind of surprised by the lack of debate also on the word genocide. Like I've heard the arguments for the folks who deem it a genocide, and I'm well aware of those. And I know there are tons of people who disagree with that term and find it insulting. But I've searched high and low for what their arguments are for why this is not genocide. So I wonder if you could, kind of, I know it's a big question, but kind of briefly explain why you think genocide is an applicable term here, and what sort of pushback, if any, have you gotten in terms of arguments from others who think it's not a genocide? What is their viewpoint for folks who maybe haven't heard either side of this argument?
Well, I know the counter arguments, and I'll go into them briefly in a second. But genocide is defined by the UN and by the international courts in a particular way that makes it clear that what is happening in Gaza is genocide. Even ethnic cleansing at the level, which is a related term, at the level it's happening in Gaza is considered genocide. I think the root of the problem is genocide was coined, not even to talk about it was coined by a Jewish man, I forget his name, but it was in reference to, I think, the Armenian genocide. And later it became applied to the Holocaust, the Shoah, and in ways that have been mobilized by Israel, especially politically, to sort of make it personal, the personal burden of Jewish people. But of course, genocides happen throughout human history, and it's not restricted to Jews. And in fact, the Holocaust was aimed at many different people. It was aimed at the Romani people, who died at a higher percentage than even Jews died. And it was aimed eventually at the Slavic people. Millions of Slavs were killed by the Germans, and the eventual goal was to kill all the Slavic people, all the Russians, all the Poles, all the Slovenians, you can go on and on. There's a lot of different Slavic nation states. And that was the goal, as well as killing all the black people and all Asian people and so on. That was the true vision of the Nazi Holocaust. Jews just happened to be in a particular situation historically and politically and emotionally for the far right in Germany. and so they were killed by the millions. It's certainly true, right? So genocide is the attempt to eradicate a nation, not a state. A nation and state are somewhat different. A nation of people, a culture. In fact, cultural genocide can be seen as genocide too. You don't have to kill all the people, you just have to kill their culture. This is what Spain tried to do in 1492 with the Jewish people in Spain, and many became conversos, and they fled first to Portugal and Thessalonica, and blah, blah, blah. So this is an old process in human culture. And in fact, um, all aggressive sort of cultures have tried to commit genocide on their fellows, including, for example, the Aztecs. I mean, it's not like only white people commit genocide. This is a fallacy that the uneducated left falls into all the time, not thinking historically. White colonialism, white forms of genocide, as happened to Native Americans in the Americas, are certainly it's very prevalent now, and it might be the dominant evil if you want to go down that road. But it's only an accident that this is where we are in history. In the past, other people have committed equally horrific actions. I argue in postmodern war that one reason we have this system of postmodern war, which precludes using all of the weapons that are possible, which was the trajectory of modern war, total war from Machiavelli until 1945 with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is caused in part by the fact that genocide is no longer allowed. But seeing what's happening in Gaza, I might have been wrong about that. Seems the world is going to allow genocide, at least in Gaza, against the Palestinians. So this is an old argument, which is generally taken up by people without much historical background. But I think the key element that confuses so many people is genocide is not just about trying to eradicate the Jewish people. This is a long-standing tradition in the West, and in its most virulent forms, it means killing all the Jews. In the form most popular in the far right in America, it means killing all but 40,000 Jews. You must keep 40,000 Jews alive so that they will convert to support Jesus in the end. And in fact, when I was in Israel for these visits, only 2 times I've been there, I asked one of these more right wing uh, Israeli generals, well, how did he feel about being allied with these far right wing people in the United States who wanted Israel to thrive for a short period and then to be destroyed in Armageddon, but 40,000 to be saved so that, in fact, the Messiah can come and the rapture can happen and so on and so forth. This is another one of these sacred beliefs that's driving so much of what's happening in the world today. And he just said, well, we're using them. He just felt they, and in fact, they have been using them, and now they're using them all the way to try to do genocide in Gaza and the West Bank. What's happening in Gaza now is being applied to the West Bank. The increase in killings, dispossessions, and so on. A whole Palestinian village was just destroyed by Israel yesterday. This is ongoing. It isn't just Gaza, and I speak of genocide because the goal of these people is to destroy the idea of Palestine, that it even existed as a real culture, as a separate way of being in the world, as a culture of mainly Arabs, but other people, Jews, mainly Muslims, but both Sunni and Shia, but also many Christians. Many who've had to immigrate, but there's still many Christian Palestinians. So it's a complex, multicultural, ethnic sort of defined culture that's been in that part of the world for thousands of years. And at times it even included, and in fact, up until Israel was established, Jews were seen as an integral part of the Palestinian community. Not a majority, but there were many Jews who lived through all the dispossessions, through all the exiles who stayed there or who returned later after the Babylonian exile. Of course, a lot returned, but actually after the other dispossessions, Jews have been returning to that part of the world, and many have lived there forever. So there was a Palestine, and that's what's being eradicated through lies about history and through actually murdering tens of thousands of people. A majority of them women and children and old men. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. So I hope that helps sort it out a little. The people make this argument. They try. When you dig down, you will always see that it's a Jewish exceptionalist argument. Only Jews can be the victims of the Holocaust. This is why right-wing Jews don't want to consider Armenia, what the Turks did in Armenia, a Holocaust. This is why they don't like people talking about the dispossession of most of the tribes of California, especially by the 49ers. My ancestors, who were Spanish and Catalan explorers, they did many evil things to the native California people, but they did not try to eradicate them. They tried to convert them and marry them. And in fact, a few of my ancestors became part of that process. But when the 49ers came, they hunted California natives like animals and killed thousands of them. And that is what genocide is. But many Jewish apologists, Israeli apologists, would like to say that no, that wasn't genocide. Genocide only happens to Jews, and it's only done by Nazis and anyone who tries to fight back against like the settler colonialism, which is the project of Israel now, certainly from the beginning. That they are, in fact, anti-Semites, but it's just not true.
And so you write in the opening of your book, it says, "quote But this book is not about Hamas and how the Palestinian people are struggling to survive. It is about Israel and its mobilization of high tech and sacred violence in their attempt to end Palestine." Um, Talk to us a little bit about what is sacred violence and how does it intersect with high tech and what Israel is doing in Gaza right now.
Well, first I want to tell people, and I urge them to read my book, it's free after all, that I am critical of the sacred violence ideas that empower Hamas, that empower the mullahs in Iran, Hezbollah, and so on. These are all dangerous, extremistic, um, elitist, in a strange way, ideas. Hamas, and the book documents this with great clarity, using a lot of the scholarship of Stephen Zunis, who lives in Santa Cruz and teaches up at the University of San Francisco. Hamas was fostered by Israel. I mean, it came out of its own dynamics in Palestinian and Arab culture, but it would not have taken control of Gaza without the explicit help of Israel. It would not have maintained control in Gaza after only winning one election with a plurality, not a majority, with Israeli help that allowed Hamas to repress the PLO, which was their main competitor in those elections. And why would Israel foster Hamas? And this is Israel under Netanyahu and other revisionist Zionists who can trace their origins back to Nazism. And the founder of their movement actually proudly proclaimed himself a fascist. So if you say, oh, Jews can't be fascist, they can be. And they're the ones in power in Israel now. And you can show this historically. It's all there if one wants to do the scholarship. So that's an important thing to say. And I have friends, and even here in Santa Cruz, when we protest sometimes, some people say, oh, Hamas is the voice of the people, blah, blah, blah. They are not the voice of the Palestinian people. If there was an open election, it's very doubtful Hamas would win. Palestine, like many of the Muslim cultures and mixed cultures, like Egypt, which has its Coptic Christian culture, and so on, like Afghanistan, which was mainly Muslim but had Buddhists and so on, it was a very tolerant form of Islam. It was not the extremist, Islamicist fundamentalism, which is mirrored in now Jewish revisionist Zionist fundamentalism and is mirrored in American white nationalist Christianity. These are all aspects of the dark side of human nature that come out in these great religions. I myself am sort of a pagan atheist, so I don't really have a dog in the fights over who's a good Christian or who's a good Jew or who's a good Muslim, but I certainly have my opinions. The people who slaughter children on purpose and who execute civilians and who take civilians hostage, like Hamas took, a few hundred people hostage, and like Israel has taken millions of people hostage, millions of civilians, and slaughtered 10,000 Palestinians for every Israeli killed by the extremists on the other side. Well, I don't accept that. I'm not going to say that Hamas is the voice of the Palestinian people. And if they were, I would not say that they should be honored just for that. I mean, a whole people can go batshit crazy, like Germany did. And that doesn't mean it's right if a whole people goes crazy. I mean, we've seen genocidal hordes and empires in the past. Just because the majority of people supported them, that doesn't mean they're right. That's not how morality works, in my opinion. But the sacred violence question, as I got into it, as I was writing the book, I've studied Silicon Valley since Actually, I was an undergraduate at Stanford when I started looking at how technology shapes society. And I'm an early adapter of computers. I've worked in the computer industry. I've worked for IBM, for startups, blah, blah, blah. I've known transhumanists from before they were transhumanists, when they were extropians, which is actually a term I like better. So I knew that a lot of people's investment in technology was driven by emotions and driven by religious type viewpoints. But it wasn't until I started digging into it, especially the key players now, that they aren't just key players in Israel's genocide, companies like Palantir and people like Musk, but also in the right wing turn of American leadership behind Trump. And there you could see just how deeply irrational they are. Bezos, Zuckerberg, Musk, Thiel, these are very dangerous people because they are both powerful and they're clever in an instrumentalist way, and they are deeply, in an evil sense, crazy. They do not believe in democracy. They believe that they are somehow better than everyone else. You can see this in the fantasies around Lord of the Rings, which is very popular. Zuckerberg even was called the Eye of Sauron by his workers, and he thought it was a compliment. It's like Trump posting this meme just the other day where he said, "Oh," saying to the people who are against Trump, the resistance, as we're sometimes called, "Oh, you are really the empire." And there he was with a red lightsaber. I mean, I don't even know if one of his minions did this on purpose. But of course, the red lightsaber does not mean you were on the good side, right? I mean, it's so simple. But these people, they're both shallow, with Trump in particular, and he has severe mental problems. But Thiel and Musk and the other South Africans and related racist people around that, they actually see themselves as the elite. I mean, one of them, a close colleague of, I forget his name right offhand, he founded a whole company called Andriel, named after Oregon's sword, right? So they're in this fantasy world. Democracy is the enemy. They are the elite by blood that should run our whole world, and it's all based on these sacred, nonsensical ideas um, and belief systems. And it's all about fear of death, as we see with a lot of the elite in Silicon Valley. This is closely linked in many cases to people who are searching for ways to um, live forever, first to have longevity and then to have immortality. And we see this in the space um, projects that Bezos, especially, and Musk have. This desire to go into space because the Earth's going to be consumed or destroyed, or somehow they can go out into space and have their own world. We see this in proposals for them to have independent cities, which in fact the Republican Party has taken up, so that they can have cities where the rule of law and the US Constitution don't apply, but they're totally pure company towns. And they can be, in fact, the nobility of those towns. Now, I like to joke that the University of California is actually more like a feudal system. And I call my boss, Manel Camps at Crown, I call him the Duke of Crown. And I say, yes, the king and his advisors of the UC Regents and so on, because there's a lot of bizarre ways power is distributed and power is applied from our campus at UCSC, because you work there too, all the way up to the UC. But it's nothing like what these people want. They want to inscribe feudalism on our world, and they see themselves as the elite. And this is driven by all sorts of fantasies, some of them about efficiency, many of them about the Lord of the Rings and the Game of Thrones. Now there's a Christian wave sweeping through Silicon Valley. I don't know if you've seen this. Uh, People writing about this. For a long time, it wasn't cool to be Christian. Now it's cool to be Christian in Silicon Valley. But what kind of Christian are they? They're Christian nationalists. They're not Jesus Christians. They're Old Testament style Christians. I mean, Christianity has your Sermon on the Mount, turn the other cheek. The only time you commit any violence if the bankers get out of control. This is what's actually in the New Testament. But in fact, these people look back to the Old Testament with the angry God. Apparently, many of them had angry fathers. I don't know, but there's a whole psychosexual analysis. People in the history of consciousness have done a lot of great work on this. I have an old colleague, she's back in Australia, Zoe Sophia, and she wrote a whole thing about why people have these kind of fantasies, even before they became prevalent or obvious in Silicon Valley, analyzing the social, sexual, paternalistic, patriarchal elements to this. But this is how people are. People are not rational. Even people who do rational work like coding and so on, they do it in the service of irrational sets of beliefs. Now, I like to think that my commitment to morality, to a certain sense of honor, to not hurting innocence, that this all comes from careful reasoning. And you can look to Spinoza and Socrates and all sorts of people who've tried to be careful with their reasoning about this. But if I look closely at myself, this is because of how my parents were, their views on the world. This is because of shows like Paladin, which I now watch religiously every morning while I work. The old gunfighter who always tried to do the honorable thing while he was quoting Greek and Latin philosophers. It's not a purely rational thing. Of course, in the long run, a moral world, a world more of laws, whether they're government enforced laws, as an anarchist, I know how problematical they can often be, but certainly moral laws, moral standards, is a better world. A world where people can live in peace. A world most people want to live in. The vast majority of people, and in my 72 years, I've met a lot of people. I used to hitchhike a lot. I hitchhiked 100,000 miles there for a couple of decades in my youth. It all seems like youth looking back now. And vast majority of people are good people. But there's a certain percentage of people who are not so good. And they have a way of taking power because this is what's important to them and rising to the top.
Yeah.
And a big hunk of people, good people even, and this is very hard for an anarchist to say, they will just go along. They will just go along with what seems to be the prevalent opinion and hope it's good, like so many Germans went along. Of course, they ended up with over 10% of the whole population dead and another 10 or 20% raped. So that's what happens when you are not careful with your moral calculus. But most people want a better world. And we've seen over time that there's been some progress made in large scale forms of government that are less horrific than in the past. But if you look deep in the past, like David Graeber does with his colleague Wingrove, and this changes everything, you can see that in the past, people had these same struggles and things got better, things got worse. Whole nations of people decided to give up living in cities, as happened in North America in an interesting period there, where these great cities grew up in Missouri and so on, and where the mounds are now. And those people, it became very hierarchical, and they argue that those people then said, this is not good, and they overthrew those cities, and they went back to being low-grade agriculturists and hunters and so on. So it's not the line of progress that when I was more optimistic and younger, I saw humanity going through. In my lifetime, I've seen Jim Crow rejected. I've seen the rise of feminism. I've seen ecological thinking rise up, but I've also seen fascism return. When I was a little kid, I did not think I would see fascism come back. When I was a teenager, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I saw fascists. Hitchhiking in Belgium, I was picked up by a fascist. I went to a march in Rome back in the late 70s of 10,000 fascists. So I knew fascism was a real thing. I helped throw Nazis out of the 1972 protest camp outside the convention that nominated Richard Nixon for president down in Miami. That was quite a riot. So I knew fascism was real, but I didn't think it would come to power in the United States by a draft dodger who likes to criticize veterans, and he's a Republican too, where they used to make a whole fetish over honoring our veterans. I mean, it was more a fetish than an actual policy, but still.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of strange things happen. I'm not sure there's progress, but we have to keep trying and hoping that we can keep civilizational collapse from happening and move on to a better, more fair, equitable world. With all the great wealth our technology produces, there's no need for the kind of suffering we see. Hungry children, murdered children in Gaza and the West Bank, so in Sudan. Now we're about to see a war break out between India and Pakistan. This is profoundly dangerous, especially because India cut off the water to Pakistan. Pakistan cannot survive without the water. India agreed to send them 60 years ago, and they've now cut off. So the fact of that action by, of course, an Indian regime powered by sacred beliefs in a Hindu story that is beautiful and ornate in many respects, but deeply evil too. I find things in the Hindu sacred beliefs that are as bizarre and and evil as in the Old Testament, where God gave the old tribes of the Jews the right to just commit genocide here and there. Of course, the shocking thing is that Netanyahu quoted this God commandment for genocide when he sent the IDF into Gaza. How anyone can believe that Israel's not committing genocide when the government of Israel has said as much, quoting God's commandment to kill not just the men, but the women and the children and the camels and the donkeys of the Amalekites. I mean, this is genocide that goes beyond even what the Nazis did. I don't think the Nazis went out of their way to kill Jewish or Romani or Slavic livestock, except that they needed it. But no, this was to eradicate these people totally. I mean, the best definition of genocide you can find is in the Old Testament and some of the commandments the Jewish God gave to the few tribes. You have to remember, most of the Jewish tribes did not go with the monolithic God. 10 of them went off and stayed pagan. They got absorbed, I guess, and we did not get such great philosophies as Maimonides and so on, one of my heroes. But yes, sacred violence.
Well,
You
I think,
must have sacred beliefs to do the kind of violence these people do.
and I think, as you illustrated there, bringing in especially the example of India and Pakistan, that this book is applicable to much more than just what we're seeing in Gaza. Can you remind people, as we wrap up here, where they can find the book, and remind them again it's free, and then also tell them what you're working on, because you got another book coming out too.
Well, you can find links to the book and a lot of my recent research on how our union, is working to consider a general strike if Trump breaks the Constitution irrevocably, and stuff on tracking coup 2025. It's all on my website, chrishablesgray.com. Those links are there. The book, there's links to the free book there. The links take you to Springer Palgrave, which is where the book is given out for free, open access electronically. If you search for the book, either go to my website or go to the actual publisher's website. Because on Amazon, for example, they won't tell you the book is free. I tried to put a notice in. I tried to in my comments. They only want to sell the book in hardcover. And it's a very pretty little book, but really, $40 or whatever they're charging for it. At least it says open access on the hardcover, but the hardcover is not free. So if you search just for the book cover, you will very likely end up with someone trying to sell you the book. You need to go to my website or go to the publisher's actual website.
Excellent.
My next book is on how virus is a language. All sorts of viral phenomena, from algorithmic intelligence, which is really what myself and my colleague Angel Gordo of Spain call AI, not artificial intelligence, but algorithmic intelligence. I didn't make a point of that in this book so much, but it's an important distinction. But also, of course, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 caused that. QAnon is also a viral phenomena. Algorithmic intelligence, the current type of AI that's become dominant in our culture, is produced by these viral processes. So I talk about how we have to understand that virus is a type of a language if we're going to understand how exponentials work, how percentages work, how all sorts of system dynamics that empower these viral phenomena. We live in an exponential age. The number of scientists and engineers alive right this minute is greater than all the rest in history. All the rest of scientists and engineers and people like Jacques, who discovered fire, and his wife Log, who discovered agriculture, they are dwarfed by the current crop of scientists and engineers changing the world. And of course, human population is going up exponentially. Extinctions are going up exponentially. This is all linked to these being viral phenomena.
When that book comes out, I'm definitely going to have you back on. Chris Hables Gray, thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox. And thank you, detoxers, for tuning in. See you next time.
Thanks, Nolan. Nice to meet you.
Hey, detoxers. Thanks for tuning in. You can find Disinfo Detox on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Every click helps grow the community and keeps those tech overlords happy. Detox complete.